Welcome to the Breadwinners, where we talk about what it actually takes to lead and earn when the world keeps shifting under your feet. I'm Rachael Lowell. For nearly 20 years, I've been coaching leaders through massive, complex change. But what's happening now feels different. The pace, the pressure, the way it spills into work and life at the same time. We keep calling it burnout, but most of what I'm seeing is something else. Too many threads, too many choices, too much noise about where to begin, and instead of movement, paralysis. But today's guest doesn't wait to see what's possible. She makes it possible. Paulita David leads the U.S. large customer sales team at Reddit. Before that, a decade at Google building businesses inside one of the fastest growing tech companies in the world. And almost every role she's ever held didn't exist before she stepped into it. She grew up watching her parents run nonprofit programs for Latino communities, work that was meaningful, underfunded, and relentless. That shaped her. She didn't walk away from the mission. She went to learn how power actually works. In this conversation, we talk about what fuels that kind of vision, why diverse teams outperform, what it means to lead a national team while raising 3 kids, and why human conversations might be more valuable than ever in an age obsessed with AI. She also has a piece of advice I wish every young leader heard sooner. Boxers don't punch themselves in the face. Let's dive in. Paulita, welcome to the Breadwinners.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
We are so excited to have you. So we're going to dive right in. I want to hear about your early relationship with work, with money, and responsibility. Tell us about what it was like growing up Paulita and seeing the world through those lenses.
That's fun. No, I don't get that question a lot. What was it growing up? Well, as it relates to work, I think one of the things that, both my parents worked growing up and they worked a lot, but they were both in nonprofit in education, both entrepreneurs. My dad had a company helping folks who didn't speak English learn English here in the workplace. And my mom, she set up programs at the University of Massachusetts for Latino youth in the Boston Public Schools. And so my earliest memories of work was just being around that all the time. So that was very formative in 2 ways. One, in that I always felt super privileged because I was always surrounded by folks who were really working incredibly hard to make it in this country. So that was really my frame of mind. And coming from a long line of immigrants as well, I always had that frame of mind. And then the other piece to it, because I always felt like I would end up in nonprofit. That was where my heart is.
Right.
But I also felt like nonprofit was really messy and really inefficient. And I think that was probably why I ended up in business.
So what did you see in the nonprofit world? What did that inefficiency look like?
It was just the constant hustle, right? You had these programs that were unbelievably important, that were changing lives, that were giving opportunities to people who needed it.
Right.
And the amount of work that it took to get those funded was a constant hustle. The grant writing, the meeting with people. It's probably why I went into sales eventually, right? That's where I ended up. That's, a different form of sales.
Yeah.
But it was just so inefficient. And I thought that there has to be a better way.
Interesting.
I think it continues to be really inefficient.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a theme that's come up on other episodes of The Breadwinners and something I've seen in my career, in my early days. What about your family kind of more broadly? It sounds like both of your parents were working. They were entrepreneurs in their own way, social entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs, right? Was that a common theme in your family, entrepreneurship, or what else did you see growing up?
Oh, yes. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, right? Mm-hmm. So they came to Latin America with nothing and built, some really successful businesses. So my family entrepreneurship goes back a ways. On the other side of my family, my grandpa also built a successful business. So I think it's in my DNA. I've worked for some pretty big companies, but every job I've ever had didn't exist before I had it.
Wow, that is huge. Actually, we need to come back to that. That is a huge thing.
Yeah. So I think entrepreneurship runs deep, both in me, it's what fuels me, but definitely in my family.
Wow. It sounds like these two themes. One, you saw entrepreneurs everywhere in your family and people who started from nothing and built these amazing operations. And you had your parents who were really focused on social impact, but you were seeing how that was not working so well. And that wasn't the direction you wanted to maybe go into. So tell us, you went to college, you started your career. How did that shape the decisions you were making?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it wasn't working so well from social entrepreneurship. I just think that industry as a whole is inefficient.
It was working great. It was just very hard.
Yeah, it was really hard. And they were doing so much good. And it was just really hard.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is where my heart is. This is what I want to be doing. But I want to go and learn business so I can do this better.
You went to learn about the business world and see what skills you could build in that space. What was it like diving into that direction?
Well, I went to University of Pennsylvania with the idea that I was going to be a lawyer because I was always told that I should be a lawyer. Take that for what you will. And so I majored in diplomatic history and I minored in art history because I thought that was interesting. And that was sort of my path. And I decided to take a year off before going to law school. And in that year, all my friends who went straight to law school were miserable. So I was like, maybe that's not the path for me. And so my first real job was at a company called the Siding Group. And that was really formative for me. It was run by this guy, Matt Sidon, and this woman, Susan Smallwow. And they had this incredible ability to spot talent and foster it, no matter who you are, what age you are. If you added value, you kept moving up the company. And it was a really awesome place to be for someone who was hungry, had ideas, really wanted to learn. Within a couple of years, I was running my own, global business there. And so if you worked hard, you could really move up. And that was something that was really, now I'm thinking in real time, that's really what I love, right? Like I am fueled by responsibility and getting that responsibility. And so
it sounds like responsibility, right? Definitely feels you. But we're just going to keep coming back to this. Like someone who can go into a company and create a job, create a global business that wasn't there before multiple times, right? It's the responsibility, but it's also the vision and being able to see what's needed and do that. Would you say?
Right. But imagine giving someone fresh out of college.
Oh, for sure.
That confidence.
Yeah.
Really, that risk taking was something that was life-changing for me. I once asked Matt years later, like why he hired me, because I had no experience. I mean, it was a brand strategy for him. So I really had no experience. And he said, because in the interview, you said, whatever you don't know, you learn quickly. And that was a huge boost to my confidence later on in life, because anytime I went into a situation where I didn't know something or, that imposter syndrome starts creeping in, I thought, well, whatever I don't know, I learn quickly. Yeah. Right. And it's sort of been a cornerstone of my career.
Yeah. So so you learned a lot of things quickly. You're now in tech. Tell us what you're doing now. Tell us about the transition to tech and what you've learned.
Wow. I've been in tech almost my whole career. Actually, my entire career since grad school, I should say. I've been in tech. And I spent 10 years at Google, then took a break, and I've been at Reddit for about 5. And right now, I have the privilege of leading the U.S. large customer sales team for Reddit.
So we skipped a piece. We skipped a piece where you went back to grad school for business, right? And then you went into the tech space. What did you find? Was it what you expected when you dove into tech? Was it like, this is sort of what you had in mind when you ended up there, or did it surprise you?
Well, it was definitely a surprise. I sort of fell backwards into tech. So, while I was at the Siding Group, it was a small company, but really influential, right? So we would go in and we would work with the execs of the company to help them with their brand strategy and vision. And so I would go into these rooms and I would sort of observe what these leaders were doing. And a lot of what they were doing had to do with numbers and spreadsheets. And I was a diplomatic history major and an art history minor. And I was using Excel to make sure that my words were nice and even looking. I was not using Excel for formulas and spreadsheets and the numbers then. So the more I spent in these rooms with these execs, I thought, well, I better go and learn a little bit about the numbers side of the business if I want to be on the other side of this table.
Right.
So on a whim, I took the GMATs and ended up at Northwestern University, the Kellogg School of Management in Chicago. And I focused on operations, finance, all the things that I wasn't good at or hadn't learned before. And so when I was at Kellogg, I got a call from this woman named Starla. And Starla is responsible for literally changing my life because Starla called me up and she said, I'm from a company called Google and I would really love for you to come intern. And I told Starla, I was like, thank you so much, but I'm really interested in the retail space because I had written a business plan to start a company in the retail space, super innovative. And I was really focused on that. And so Starla wrote me and she said, listen, we have a retail practice. We'd love you to intern with us for the summer in our retail practice. And I said, Starla, thank you so much. But I'm really not interested in being on the West Coast. I'm hoping to be in New York. And she wrote me back and she said, well, we have a retail practice in New York. And I said, all right, fine, I'll interview. And that's how I ended up at Google. Tech was a really unexpected move for me, but obviously changed my life. I love, especially in those days, it was very fast paced, super innovative. The Google mantra back then was ideas come from everywhere. And so I think it was just a real eye-opening experience about, what innovation and technology can do to change the world. And that was an amazing place to be at that time. And again, it speaks to that, if you have an idea, you can go do it. Right. And I obviously am attracted to that.
Love that. You spent almost 2 decades in tech, right? So you walked in. Was there a moment, obviously it was fast paced, there was a lot of new things to learn, which we know you're great at. Was there a moment where you were like, this is surprising. This isn't what I assumed it would be like. And we talked to guests about the moment that work kind of didn't match what they had hoped or envisioned at an earlier point in their career. Do you feel like something like that kind of resonates for you?
Well, I didn't really have a vision of anything, right?
Right.
This was sort of early days in the tech space. And I don't think anyone really had a vision of what it looked like. It was a real different vision of what I thought I would be doing after business school. Right. I had envisioned going into and starting my own business. And when I went to Google, I was like, I'll do Google for a year or two, and then I'll go start my own business. 10 years later, and then I'm still in tech now. So I think I really didn't have a vision of what things should look like. And I thought I'll just go with the flow, see what happens.
Got it. And did you find when you went into these rooms, you were sitting around the table, how many women were in that room with you, right? Was it a situation
0.
where you felt, what?
I mean, as I got further on in my career, there were less and less women.
Yeah.
And by the time I was leading teams, I was probably the only one in many of those rooms. And I was certainly the only Latina in any of those rooms.
Yeah.
I mean, I was the highest ranking Latina at Google, and I wasn't even that high ranking.
What did that feel like to constantly be sort of not alone and isolated, because the kind of professional that you are is actually really connected, but being, one of a kind in that setting or in your role and your level?
Well, I think I very clearly remember being in a room with my peers, and it was all men.
Yeah.
And one of them was telling the story about how his wife was upset about something. And then eventually they all looked to me, and I was like, that I do everything that your wife does and this job. And then another one said, yeah, and you do it better than all of us. And it was a real, shocking moment to me. It shouldn't have been that shocking, but it was in that moment. It was so palpable that the difference between being a woman in the workplace is not just being a woman, but it's all the things around you that are different, right? A lot of my colleagues, all they did was worry about work because they had someone else at home worrying about all the other things. And I, like a lot of women, was doing both those things.
Yeah. How many kids did you have when they said that?
I think I only had one at the time.
Share how many you have now.
I have 3 now, so
yeah,
but it's great.
Okay. So you were in that setting, and when you heard that, right, did you bring that home and talk to your husband about it? Did you talk to other women in the organization? Like, how did you find a safe space to land with that kind of experience?
Well, I should say my husband and I are very much partners, right? He does, half. I think what was shocking to me in that moment is that wasn't the case for a lot of couples, right?
Right.
What I would say is, and especially not for a lot of men in the workplace, right? They weren't pulling their weight. Like the guys in that room weren't pulling their weight at home. What I would say in terms of how being the only affected me or, feeling alone, I'm sure it has affected me, but I don't think it's a negative. I think it's absolutely a positive that I bring a totally different aspect to the workplace because there's not a lot of me out there.
Yeah. We're going to keep going back to this because I think it's just such an important orientation to have right now, to be able to go into all of the different companies that you've been in and build something essentially that didn't exist before. And when you're somebody who feels comfortable doing that, first of all, at a time when everything is changing so rapidly, that's a really great orientation to have. But also, if you are comfortable doing, then if you're feeling isolated in one space, you're already kind of paving your own road on the business front, right? So tell us, do you feel like being the only woman, the only Latina at the level that you were, do you feel like the choices you made around leadership, the way you understand building business is different? Or just in general, as you found your way in tech, what choices do you feel like you made that reflected your values and your focus?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I'll tell you a funny story. So back at Google, the head of people operations at the time, Laszlo Bach, called me up and his team. And, we're studying the most efficient teams in the company and the most successful teams. And your team keeps popping up. And what we noticed when studying your team is that you also not just are so successful, but you are one of, if not the most diverse team in the company. And we really want to understand why and how you've made these decisions to build such a diverse team. And I looked at them and I was like, well, I had no idea.
Right.
I'm like, thank you for noticing. I had no idea. You tell me. I didn't know I had a diverse team. I didn't even think about it. And so they decided to write a case study on it.
Amazing.
And what they found, which I'm super grateful for, is that while most people have an unconscious bias against diversity, I have an unconscious bias for diversity. And this was way before all of the studies came out about how diverse teams are more efficient and more successful and all that. And upon reflecting on it, I thought, well, I guess it's true because when I see a person of color or a woman across from me in an interview, my mind immediately goes to, well, that person worked that much harder to be in this room.
Right.
And so I guess I do have an unconscious bias, but in this sense, it's sort of a superpower in that it has resulted in really diverse teams throughout my career and really, really hardworking, efficient, and successful teams.
Wow. That's incredible. And I love the idea that your brain is just, you just have this unconscious way of seeing how powerful diversity can be, what the people who are coming to interview with you, how much they've overcome to get there. You know what that's like. I'm wondering, is that a message that you bring to your colleagues in the tech space? Or is it just something where they're going to see you do it and build these amazing teams that are diverse? Are they going to follow your example? Or is that something you find you talk about with them?
Well, now I do, right?
Yeah.
Now I do, especially when all of those studies came out about diverse teams. It was, I've been living this and I can tell you it is in fact true. And so, yeah, I try to talk about it a lot. And, finding good talent, there's a lot of different recipes for that. This just happens to be a piece of the puzzle when you're talking to candidates. It's just another piece of someone's puzzle that makes them a great candidate.
Yeah. Some of the data that's out there, and we can share some in the notes, diverse teams are more innovative. They're higher performing. That's what some of the data says. What data points or what do you kind of tout as like, this is why I know this is a great way of building a team?
Every team I've ever had has been really high growth, very innovative.
Yeah.
And I think 1000% that's due the people who make up that team, right? You have to have a mentality of seeing opportunity where others don't.
Mm-hmm.
And have to imagine that part of that is from having a team that's diverse in all aspects.
Right. Amazing. We're going to dive into the section that we call the carbo load. But before we do, everything about breadwinning is both and, right? So we're talking about you have 3 kids, you have a team, you're leading on multiple fronts, you have a partner. When you think about what's the both and right now that sticks out the most, what pops into your mind?
The both and. It's a good question. When I look at my priorities in life and like how you get things done, it's family, work, and then everything else, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so family and friends and then work, I'd say. And so as long as I'm able to somehow balance all that, boy, it's never perfect, right? I spend a lot of time on a plane, but I also spend a lot of time on the soccer field and I spend a lot of time in the classroom. It's just making choices. And I know that this moment in time is short-lived, right? Like at some point, my kids are not going to want to hang out with me and they're not going to want me coming to school and doing things and volunteering. So I'm trying to take advantage of all that. And I do think that I am a much better mom and partner because I work, because I spend a lot of time building businesses and having a team that I work with. And I think I'm a much better leader because I'm a mom and partner. And so your and piece really resonates with me.
Well, I'm going to tell our listeners something that we haven't addressed yet that I've been skirting around, but I am actually on that list, hopefully, at the list of Paulita's friends, right?
Oh, yeah.
We go back a very long way. And she really lives this, right? Like somebody, you might think somebody who is in the role that she's in at Reddit wouldn't have time. You have so much on your plate and you show up for people consistently and you don't compromise on it. And it's really, really remarkable. Okay, let's carbo load.
Thank you.
Here's the question that we ask folks because we're living in a time of so much disruption on every front, but you're in the tech space. So particularly interested to hear how you'll answer this. What is always going to be human about the way we work?
With respect to like AI?
I mean, yeah.
Yes. I get this question a lot, as you can imagine. And, we talk about this a lot at Reddit. And one of the things that we always talk about is you can't have artificial intelligence without human intelligence. Right? Human intelligence is what is fueling all of the artificial intelligence. And quite literally at Reddit, we sit on the largest repository of human conversation on the internet.
Yeah.
And people come on Reddit to have very human conversations. They are connecting the dots and sharing all about their lived experiences. And I can't imagine that AI is going to be able to replace that anytime soon. You really just can't have AI without human and the human experience. And we see that in a very real way as Reddit is fueling a lot of these AI, this LLMs, right? This AI search models with human conversation.
Yeah. It's a great way to look at it. One of the reasons we ask that is like the robots are taking over, kind of fear that people share sometimes. And what you're saying is this is really about taking the insights from humans and being able to make it more widely accessible and available, but not replacing that human perspective, which I think is really just such an important point to make. Tell us about what you're learning right now about being a leader during these times and how you encourage those people who are sitting with you in the interviews to be approaching work right.
Well, we do live in interesting times.
Yeah.
I think about this a lot as a leader. And I lead a team that's all over the country. It's a relatively large team, so we have representation from everywhere. And so the best that I can do, twofold, from a business perspective, be super clear about where we're going and why we're doing what we're doing. And then from a human perspective, it's making sure that people have a safe space, both to be themselves, which is hard to do. It's hard to bring your whole self to work. But as we talked about before, I see that as a benefit. And I make sure that my team knows that I see that as a benefit, right? Whatever your experience is, it's going to help us grow our business.
Wait, say a little bit more about that, because I think it's important to put a fine point on it. So you're saying being your authentic self at work, the connection you're making there is your commitment to diversity, right? And to everybody bringing their own experience. Is that what you're saying? I just want to make sure.
It's a commitment to diversity, but it's also commitment to whatever it is that you're living in your life. If you don't have to spend energy worrying about being someone else, you can spend that energy worrying about how to grow your business, worrying about how to make sure that your colleagues are doing their best work with you and that they feel supported, that your team feels supported. There is enormous amount of wasted time and effort worrying about things that you really don't need to be worrying about. So if you feel like you're in a safe space and you feel like your ideas are going to be heard and listened to, and that you can have a conversation where you can push back and no one is going to be upset about it, they're going to actually feel like they benefit from it, that's good for everyone. The worst thing a leader can do is surround themselves by a bunch of yes people.
Right. I think I couldn't agree with that more. And one of the things that I talk about in organizations, there are 5 different areas we need to focus on to make sure that we're achieving what we want to from business and a human perspective. But if we don't have that safe space, and if people can't say what they're actually thinking, good luck trying to get where you want to go, right? You can focus on like numbers all day, but if people can't say what they need to get to the level of performance because they're too scared or uncomfortable, it's going to be an uphill battle. We usually ask our guests about a great work event they attended recently, but I know that you went to the Super Bowl, so I'm ready to hear all about that.
That was amazing. As you know, we've talked about I'm bilingual, bicultural, so I speak both football and football. And I felt like, because I grew up in Boston and I'm Latin, so I really felt like all my worlds were coming together when the Patriots were playing at the Bad Bunny concert. I knew it was going to be amazing. That was a given. I thought it was going to be more like his residency in Puerto Rico this summer. But really, I just thought it would be like a lot of dancing and music. I did not expect it to be a love letter to Puerto Rico. It was so beautiful. And I certainly did not expect it to be so unifying and positive. Like every single piece of that show was not only an artistic, well thought out, full of Easter eggs, amazing performance. It was just so beautiful and unifying. And I got to tell you, as someone from Latin America, when he started listing all of those countries, it was unreal. And like you've seen all of the comments, the Reddit threads were blowing up. Look at all the countries. He said Canada, because of course, Canada is part of the Americas. And it was just so beautiful. All of it. Like Chile gets mentioned in nowhere, but Bolivia, whoever mentioned that, he went through the whole list and we were like just losing our minds. And still, it was just so positive after so much negativity. And it was as diverse a crowd as you can get at the Super Bowl. But it was people from all over and everyone was just bouncing. Like I would imagine most people didn't know the words, didn't know what he was singing. It doesn't matter. One of the things that's so awesome about Latin music is that you cannot listen to Latin music and not move and not just be energized and happy. And then Lady Gaga gets out there and she's doing her thing. And everybody was like, what is happening right now? I mean, Ricky Martin, such a full circle moment. If you know anything about Puerto Rico, if you know anything about Latin music, it was just so awesome.
Unbelievable. So given that halftime show, what does that mean about business today? What message is it sending leaders who are thinking in maybe outdated terms?
Here's what I'll say from a business perspective. I was talking to Tim Ellis, who is the CMO of the NFL, about this a little bit. And, you know, the NFL is global, right? And all their growth is coming internationally. So when they're looking for, you know, who's the biggest artist, they don't care what you're singing, right? They don't care what language you're singing. I don't know if you know this, but Bad Bunny is the first artist to go #1 in Spanish in China ever. And so that just tells you how global he is. And if you are so ignorant as to ignore a popular artist because of the language that they're singing in, that's on you, right? It says more about you than it says about the artist.
Amazing. One more question. What advice would you give to people who, you know, younger people or people who are trying to make transitions now in their career? What advice would you give?
Boxers don't punch themselves in the face.
Okay.
And what I mean by that, and this is especially true for women and people of color, is that when you are going into an interview or a new opportunity, you know, oftentimes someone will ask you something along the lines of, can you do this job? Or have you had experience doing this or whatnot? And folks will be like, well, you know, I've never done it before, or I could probably do it. Boxers don't punch themselves in the face. So if someone asks you whether you can do something, the answer is unequivocally, yes, I can, because you know you can figure it out. So don't punch yourself in the face. You go out there and you just show them what you got.
And learn quick. Like you know how to do. Paulita, thank you so much for joining us on the Breadwinners, and we'll keep in touch. We'll keep following all the amazing things you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been the Breadwinners podcast. I'm your host, Rachael Lowell. The show is produced by Rachael Lowell and Rachael Sklar. Technical production by Ron Pissarro. Music by Hannah Baki. With gratitude for support from Ruth Ann Harnish. The Breadwinners was founded in 2019 by me and Jennifer Owens. The Breadwinners is a co-production between Smart Friends Network and Reworking Leadership. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.